boys. Let me get into it.
Oh, shit, my legs.
Oh, it's kind of burning, eh?
Yeah. Super hot.
No, it's okay.
Oh.
Yeah. It's really hot. So
Compared to that freezing garage. Man, I'm glad we made the choice to go in here.
Are we filming?
Hot tub live stream.
Oh, it's a good thing there's money trees everywhere we go, eh, boys?
Yeah. We're shaded by the cash.
Yeah, Phil, I was telling Griff we should do some more rapport building before we jump right into the meat and potatoes of the episode.
Dude, my girlfriend always makes fun of me for saying rapport. I say it so often. She's like, rapport.
We're just getting back from Mexico.
Yes.
Fresh off the top performer trip.
Yep.
That's why you look beautifully tanned.
Yeah, beautifully tanned, a little red for some of us. But we were missing the heat, so we decided to jump back in.
Yeah. Feel nice in here. Got the money trees all around. And today we are chatting about profitability.
Yes, sir.
How do we make some actual money from our business? So lots to go into here, and we decided we'd have Big Daddy Griffin on here because he obviously ran a super profitable business this year. As a rookie operator, close to 40% profit, I think.
Yep, just about. Definitely a profitable business and experience, and excited to talk about it a little bit tonight.
Nice. And what do you think it was? Actually, I guess before I jump into that, like Phil, obviously you ran a nicely profitable business this year. And your first year wasn't the same story. I think you were maybe closer to 15 or 20% profit.
Yeah, just about that.
So, yeah, I guess, like, what do you think separated those two businesses? Like, why do you think you ran such a more profitable business in your first year? And Phil, why do you think, you didn't?
I'll let Griff go first.
Yeah, great question there, Will. So basically, I like to break down profit into to two portions. So obviously you have the price of the job, which has a huge impact on how much money you can make, and then the cost of the job as well, which ultimately defines from that price how much you get to keep. So there's many different ways to manage how to keep your costs low and how to keep your price high. I think one of the biggest things that I did was keeping my price high, and then my costs at a very consistent level,
right?
So that I knew exactly how much I was making throughout the course.
So you're making a very consistent margin.
Yeah.
And obviously, the price is the amount that the customer is paying, and then in the cost we have the cost of labor. So how much are we paying our painters? Then we have the cost of materials, and then we've got marketing costs, and then we have kind of other fixed expenses.
Yes, for sure.
In your first year, like, do you think it was that your prices were too low? Were your costs too high? Like, where was the discrepancy there?
It was a total mix of everything. Yeah, price too low, cost too high. Had some painters who are not painting profitably, and then had some jobs that were not quoted profitably. So there was production issues, and there's also sales issues. But the combination of both of them made for a pretty unprofitable year.
Yeah. So what was it in your quoting process? Because basically, just to break it down for anyone who is in student works or not, basically we calculate the number of hours that we think it's going to take based on the number of square feet, and then we add how many gallons of paint we think it's going to take, and then we essentially divide it. So typically in student works, you're going to want your cost to be about 40% of the job, and then you've got about 30% of royalty that you're paying to student works, which would leave you with another 30% of profit, which would be kind of like what you'd be aiming for, give or take a few percentage points depending on a few different factors. And obviously, I think you were pretty far off of that. And it's not that you were paying more royalties, so your costs were just higher as a percentage of the job. Do you think you were skimming your prices, when you were walking into a quote? Maybe run me through what went through your head in your first year versus what changed in your second year and how you were actually able to price better.
Right. Well, part of it was just education and knowing what to quote. There are some types of jobs that are a little bit more difficult to quote, and I definitely wasn't using all the resources at hand to know it. I was kind of just trusting that I was doing a good enough job. But for sure, I would make an effort to lower the price in any way I could, because I thought that would make it more likely for me to sell the job, and I thought that the client would like me more if I was selling the job at a better price. So I wouldn't necessarily if we were to look at the numbers of it, I wouldn't necessarily be I'm just gonna not charge $3,000. Instead, I'm going to charge $2,500. But more so, I was like taking advantage of all of the little small multiplications and all the small times that I was counting hours. And when something was supposed to take 2 hours, it would take 1 hour and 45. And when something would take 3 hours, it would take 2.5. And obviously that added up over across a long period of, or across a lot of different small sections of the job. And in the end, my job would be less expensive and therefore less profitable as well.
Yes, just like generally rounding down to appease like the client.
Yeah.
Rather than, you know, rounding up to reflect the actual work being put into the job.
Yeah, and it was mostly just like a mindset thing. I was mostly just like, I'm not worth this much. My painters are not worth this much. The client's going to like me more if I give them a better price. Nothing of it was really based in reality. It was mostly just like, I came into it with some assumptions, and I thought my assumptions were right, but then taking a look at my peers, they were booking the equal amount of jobs at a higher price. So obviously somewhere in my assumptions, I was making a mistake. Yeah,
and totally like a reasonable assumption to make. You know, first-time business owner last year, you know, you're really doing something you've never done before. So obviously there's a steep learning curve, and, you know, you showed the learning this year, obviously running like a much bigger and
pretty much doubled my profit first to second year in terms of a percentage.
Yeah, and
you doubled your business size, so you made 4 times the profit essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. Fuck you, Mom. I did it.
Phil, what would you say was like the biggest change between first year and second year in terms of, you know, improving that percentage, and then also just like staying more consistent over the course of the year?
I would say the first thing was just being more confident in my prices and kind of not letting anything up. Like there was a lot of things that I quoted in my first year that I didn't really understand what it took to produce them, and I kind of just guesstimated. And obviously that I'm gonna guesstimate lower, the same way that your client's gonna, like, you know, make sure that they're getting the most out of the job. Usually when any estimations or guesses are happening, you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot if you have a limiting mindset. And then the second thing was just recruiting people who were actually capable of producing the job at the standard and at the time that it took. In my first year, I sort of accepted anyone into my business, whereas in my second year, I was actually looking for top performers. And there's a big difference in someone who's a top performer and who's not. Looking at some of the financials in my first year, and also in my second year, like my best crews were probably doing, like, were potentially twice as profitable as my worst crews. Like my best crews were doing 40% profit, and my worst crews were doing 20% profit.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, I know you had like a super sick team this year, a lot of like super key players to your business. Obviously, you know, you did close to $500,000. Can you speak to the value of like people in your business that you can just completely trust to do their job amazing?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 pieces on that, and the first one is just kind of a mistake that I see a lot of rookies get wrong, or honestly even veterans, is seeing recruiting as like binary. Right. So they'll work backwards from their goal. They'll say, okay, I want to do $400,000 of revenue this year. I want to make, you know, 25% profit, which means I need to do, you know, this many quotes per week. Okay, this is how many leads I need to get. This is how many, you know, average job size. They'll do all the math backwards, and they'll go on their weekly inputs, and then they'll do the same thing for recruiting, where it's like, hey, you know, I'll have to recruit 6 crews to do $400K, which means that I'll need 12 painters, which means that over a 12-week period, if I do, you know, 3 interviews a week and I'm my average whatever, like basically they'll just do the math and think about it as binary. So like either I have a painter or I don't, and then they'll, you know, try to get the number of painters that they need, maybe with a bit of a margin, assuming there's a little bit of turnover. And the way I saw it was really just the more time that I put into recruiting, the better people I'm going to get, and then I'm still going to end up with the same number of painters, but I'm just going to have better painters. Yeah. Because if I have twice the pool, then on average my painters are going to be a significant amount better.
For sure.
So I think really it's just like the manual input of like how many hours am I putting in. Like honestly, when it comes to recruiting, like the number of leads that you get, the number of job applications is never the bottleneck. Like so many people need jobs. If you make a post on Indeed or Hireology or whatever, like you will get all the applicants you need. I think the vast majority of people aren't actually taking the time to go through all of those.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I had probably like 500 applicants.
Yeah, I had about
year,
500 as well.
And you know, I only had 10 employees at my peak, and I probably only looked at about 100 of those applications.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that's like the main thing. And then, sorry, what was your question again? Like, what was the benefit of having such a good team?
What's like the value of having players that you can be like, okay, here's what I need you to do for the week, and then they check in on Friday and they have it all done.
Yeah, I think it's just leverage, right? Having a team that is self-sustaining. Like really when I was looking for painters, I would half the time look for an actual painter. you know, if their English isn't that great, like that's totally fine if they're just a painter. And if they're going to be a crew manager, they're going to need to have a car, they're going to need to be able to problem solve, they're going to need to be someone who takes initiative. So I was really looking for those things. And then obviously expectation setting as well. When I hired them, it's like, hey, your role is not just painting, it's actually all of these other things. What about you? Because I know you mentioned that you had a couple different crews, some that were like really good and then others that weren't as good. So I'm curious, like, what do you think the difference was between those crews, and how could you multiply the good crews?
For sure, great question. So in terms of multiplying the good crews, I would say like target more people. Like a lot of my recruiting was like through job postings, and I wouldn't have an actual interaction with any of my potential employees before I actually hosted the interview. I think that was a huge miss by me, because if, you know, I didn't really sell them on the value of the business and how much, you know, it could actually benefit them, the different positions in my business, the skills that they could build. And then, what was the other part?
So you didn't build any rapport with them.
Exactly.
And you didn't build the need.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, like, at that point, they're just objectifying you. They just see you as a job interview, and they're going to compare that, the wage or the expectations, to any other job, as opposed to actually getting buy into Griffin bets and the skills they're going to learn, and liking you and wanting to work with you and wanting to work in your business and seeing kind of what the future could bring.
And I definitely missed out on a lot of good applicants by not doing that. People who I did hire who said, yeah, I'd love to work for you. And then, you know, they just fell through. Ultimately, like, one mindset could be like, oh, like, these people don't want to work for me. And the other mindset that I am trying to adopt is like, I didn't make these people want to work for me.
Totally, yeah. You want to be like having some touch points. You don't want to hire someone and then like not talk to them for a month. At least checking in on them, making sure they're still dialed and stuff. Will, obviously a sale is the part, it's probably the biggest part of the profitability, at least based off your guys' opinions. And then the second part of the profitability is just how much you can produce that job for. What would you say are some things that you can do to make sure that your production is as profitable as possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely agree with your first point that the sale is most of it. So I'm definitely down to kind of jump into that and how we can actually sell jobs at a good rate and provide real value to customers. And when it comes to production, I think probably the biggest thing that I learned, lesson that I definitely learned the hard way from a few different examples, is just the expectation setting, not just setting good expectations with the client about what the final outcome is going to look like, but also transferring that set of expectations. And it's not just like expectation, like, is it good, is it bad? It's just like, this specific area is being done in this specific way, and this specific color is being pulled onto this area. Like, all the nuances of each individual job are being transferred and packaged directly to the crew manager and the crew there. Because I found that, one, it would just take longer. Two, they would have to talk to the client way more, which again would take more time, and the client would also be more frustrated. They would see us as less professional, which would then have caused their assumptions about the work being done to be lower.
Right.
So I found that, like, the less professional we would come across, the more touch-ups there would be, or the more unsatisfied they would be. Whereas you could give them the exact same job at the exact same price, and if you come across as professional and put together, and your crew managers are, you know, more dialed, then they're gonna take your word for that being a $5,000 job. They're gonna say, oh, this guy was professional in the way he talked to me. You know, he was professional in their systems when they arrived, so I assume they're professional in their painting systems. And I'm a customer, I don't really know too much about painting. It looks good to me, so I'm assuming it's done well. As opposed to the other way around, they were unprofessional. They showed up late. You know, they weren't communicating very well with me, or they were over communicating with me. It seemed like they didn't know what they were doing, and so I'm gonna assume that they don't know what they're doing, and I have to step in here and over manage the project.
And look for some things that might not be up to their standard.
Exactly.
Totally. So expectation setting is definitely a big part of it, and then where that's going to save you time in the future is just like around payment collection and also touch-ups. Griff, we were talking earlier, touch-ups is a big way to lose money because you're going back to jobs and you're putting more man hours than expected. Like, what is I guess, what do touch-ups do to your profitability when you don't get them done right away?
Yeah, good question. So if we take like how long a job would take, I usually count for like an hour or an hour and a half at each job per day to set up and clean up. So if we go about a job and say like we've had poor communication with the client, we're going to be finishing at like 4 o'clock and they're not getting back to like 5:30, or even they're like leaving out of town for the weekend and we're finishing on a Friday. Like, there's nothing worse than that, because we finish the job, we pack up, you know, your painters are like happy, they feel like they've completed a job well done, And then on Monday, the client gets back, or Sunday night, and they're like, oh, there's like 7 spots that you guys missed or that I don't like the look of. So then you're, paying probably like an additional hour for setup and cleanup when you go to do that touch-up.
Right.
And then probably like 2 or 3 hours to actually complete the touch-up. So
and your painters are mad. Your client's like, what the heck? Why is there touch-ups to begin with?
Yeah.
Like, you haven't collected the money yet. That might impact like the rollout of your payroll.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So the best thing to do is just to set yourself up so that you can collect payment before you leave the job site. And what that looks like is either having expectations set with the client. Hey, are you going to be home at 4 p.m. when we're done this job? And if they say no, just genuinely asking them, hey, we need you to be home at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of contractors do. If you hire a plumber, they expect you to be home. If you hire someone to come fill up your propane tanks, they expect that you're going to be home. So it's totally not unreasonable for us to ask the client to be home at a certain time so that we're not wasting like $400 leaving, coming back, setting up again, doing all the touch-ups,
yeah, exactly,
all that
because
stuff.
that opportunity cost, like you mentioned, $400. Like those 3 hours, if you're operating at a $100 retail rate, those 3 hours could be spent on another job. And then you have to account for, paying painters in the middle of the day to drive from one site to another.
Yeah.
And, it's
motivation again.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah. So, Will, back to the sale a little bit. What are some ways that you would make sure that you're selling a job at the highest cost? I know we were talking about ballparking. I know you were talking about expectation setting, kind of tailoring the quote to the client. You did a great job of just making sure that you were selling jobs at a premium price. How did you not get away with that, but how did you present yourself in a way that clients were actually accepting of your premium price?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately a lot of it is the actual value that you do provide and being confident in that. So, when you hire the right people and when you have like an actual business and you have a list of customers who are happy and satisfied, it almost becomes easier to then sell at a higher price because you have the confidence that like you actually are providing value, and even at that price, customers are happy and satisfied with the result. So I think that's a lot of it is just like the mindset of just being confident and knowing that your prices are legit. Honestly, I used to be less confident in my prices, and then I compared them to more like market averages. And of course, there's always like the 1 or 2 low ballers, but a lot of the time, like professional painting companies would be charging more than me.
Yeah.
Like I've done a job
100%.
for like, I booked it for like 10K, and they're like, yeah, we got a quote for like 22K.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay,
had a
so
lot
I'm
of
not
those experiences
scamming
as well.
people. Like this is like a legitimate business we're running. Like we are giving good prices. We do give good service.
Absolutely.
And we're not the cheapest because we take the time to talk to you about what your specific needs are. We're not going to scam you and come back later and say, oh, this thing wasn't quoted or this thing wasn't quoted. Like I'm going to take the time now to communicate it. So just confidence. I think branding as well. I mentioned in the last podcast, like having a professional brand helps the customers see you in a more professional way, and their assumptions right off the bat are that they're going to be charged a professional price because you're a professional company.
Branding doesn't necessarily just mean like your logo and stuff. It also means like you showing up on time and you wearing professional clothing when you show up, and your painters like having professional conversations with them and all that stuff. That's what justifies the price.
Yeah,
and
there's nothing you can do worse than showing up to a job site in like sweatpants and like flip-flops. It's like,
wow.
like if you're meeting the client for the first time, and you're going to the estimate and you're showing up in like a dirt grubby t-shirt and like sweatpants that clearly aren't painter clothes, you just like rolled out of bed, like it really speaks to like who you want to be viewed as, right? Which ultimately does matter. It affects how much you can charge. And then it also, like, just to touch on your question about ballparking, that branding comes before you even like do the walk around at the quote with the client, because there's many ways to ballpark a potential client, because people are usually interested in how much a job is going to cost before you get there. I've had a lot of people ask me like, oh, how much do you think this is going to cost? And a great way to set expectation is not to give them like your average job size, because that's like not indicative of your like typical job size. You're going to have 10K jobs, you're going to have like $800 jobs. So what I typically do when a client asks, say we're doing setting up a quote for a deck, say, okay, so some clients, they want, the minimum done, we're just doing the floor and stairs, maybe a railing, like one coat, same color. That job can come out to, maybe about $1,500. Whereas other people are looking to get the whole porch redone, soffits, fascia, ceiling, floor, railing, and, we're changing the color. And those jobs could be, upwards of $3,000.
True. So giving a pretty big range and then also not being specific to their job.
Yeah, exactly.
Saying this is what other people's jobs came out to. So therefore I'd assume that your job comes within that range, but not really like giving a ballpark to their job.
Yeah.
And then what points in time would you end up actually giving clients an idea of what the project was going to cost?
Yeah, I would do that typically right before I go back to my car to write up the estimate. So, it's the part of the walk around, the pre-close. You make sure that the price that you estimate before you actually write it up, that the job will be, is within the client's budget. So I'm not going to, spend 45 minutes writing up a $6,000 quote for a client that wants to spend $2,000. So really getting that knowledge, making sure that they're aware that this project is going to cost, say we're doing a deck and like I know that the project might cost, $2,700, $2,800, $2,900. I might give them a range of like, this might come out to like about $3,500. Does that range make sense to you? And if they're like, what, like, no, like I was expecting like $1,500, obviously like readjust, like reaffirm like what it is, the service that you're providing. Whereas if you give them that $3,500 range and they're like, oh, like great, that sounds great, perfect price, and you go back to the car and it comes out less than that, then the sale goes way easier because they're like, oh, I thought you said it was going to be 35, it's actually only 31, let's do it. Yeah. Like there's way fewer objections to handle when you tell them a higher price and come with a lower. Whereas if you come with a lower and present a higher, they're like, oh, why did the price change? Like it's a lot harder to book that job.
Yeah, and I think from the sound of it as well, like you're doing a bit of like a consultation. So you're not just like taking the measurements, asking them what they want, and then saying, okay, I'll give you a price. It's like, hey, like based on these specific things that we talked about, like this might be kind of the price range. Does that make sense with like the project that you guys want done? And then either it's like, yes, go ahead, you make the thing, or it's like, oh no, like we want this, and that done. And then you can either, adjust your quote, not in terms of just changing the price, but you're actually changing the scope of work to reflect the price that they are
100%.
looking to pay.
Yeah. Like some clients just want you to slap a coat of paint on because they want it to look prettier. Yeah. And other clients like really want like a good product that is going to last them for 3, 5, 7 years, where it's going to look great for that length of time. And obviously, like the price that we have to charge reflects that, because that affects how much prep work we do. It affects the type of paint that we use. All these attributes that contribute to the price of the job can be determined just through a conversation.
Yeah, and Phil, I'd be interested to get your take on this as well. But like one of the things that I find most important in being able to have that conversation is the level of trust. Because I found when I was earlier in my sales process and I maybe hadn't built enough rapport yet, or I just wasn't as skilled of kind of like feeling out the social situation and as good at sales, you could say, or consulting, whatever you want to call it, I wasn't really able to pull a number out of people. And they weren't like, I would be like, oh, like, does this kind of range sound good? They're like, I don't know, like, we'll see what you come up with. And it would just be, they would be objectifying me. They'd be looking for a price. And then, if they wouldn't book, it's because they're not sure if they should trust me yet. And they want to get a second or a third opinion to see if the price is good, to see what other contractors' processes are like. Whereas when I was able to start building a lot more trust throughout the entire sales process, then that conversation happens naturally. Like they know that I have their best interests at heart, and the best way for someone who has their best interests at heart to give them the best job is to have the most open, clear communication.
Totally.
So starting to get that trust built, then that kind of opens the flow of conversation. What was that like for you, Phil? Did you find
it's kind of hard because the confidence that you need to build that trust is just going to come with time. But definitely I recognize when I started showing up to jobs, like especially midsummer, if you show up to a quote at 2 p.m. and you just hopped off a job site, you get in your car, you're covered in paint, and we're like, oh yeah, like we're just coming off this job site, like we're doing this face show, we're actually doing a pretty similar job to yours right now, like how about we take a look at it together? It's like totally different. So and obviously there's different ways that you could present yourself as a confident person, but just pretty much whatever leverage you have in that way, whether you've already started producing and you can use that as a way to prove that you're confident. The client manual is also a super awesome way that you can build people's trust, putting reviews in there, putting some before and after photos in there, putting, I don't know, some like employee profiles in there are some ways that you can build trust.
Yeah, super underrated.
Just to jump in there, when it comes to the client manual and all the other things you mentioned, like I would argue that your brand is totally nothing to do with the logo and the color that you pick. It's to do with the way you present yourself across every single touch point. So what you want is for it to be cohesive. Like you don't want like you to be super professional at the quote and then your caller is disorganized, or your person who's knocking at the door is like way too salesy, because it just feels like different at each stage. Like you want to find essentially what your brand is and the way you want to frame yourself, and then you want to have each touch point, whether that's a client manual that you're bringing to the quote, whether that's a pre-estimate client package that you're emailing, or even just the wording of the email template you send them beforehand. It all needs to align and be cohesive, and then they'll kind of just understand you as like this brand. It's like all of these touch points added together are what the brand are, and then obviously the better that those can be, then the better they're going to perceive you as. And it's not necessarily better or worse, it's also the way that you want to be perceived based on the actual services you offer. So one thing that you mentioned is like showing up with clothes that have paint on them in the middle of the summer. I've definitely heard multiple opinions on it. I've done it both ways. Griffin, what did you do? Were you someone that showed up like really like fancy, like a nice collared shirt, or did you more like play the role of a painter? Like how'd you go about that?
Good question. So I would say like in the preseason, obviously we haven't started production yet. So like January to like early April, early May, like obviously we can't paint exterior projects. As a student works operator, we typically don't start production until April or May, even interior jobs. So I would show up to those estimates looking pretty professional. I'd wear like, a collared t-shirt and, try to look like smart casual, but nothing too much, because if you show up in like a suit and tie to a quote for like a $1,500 job, the client's going to be like, this guy takes himself way too seriously. Like, what am I getting myself into here? And similarly, if you go like too far the other way, where you just show up in a t-shirt and you don't really seem like you care about the image that you're presenting, then they're also going to be like, oh, like I don't know if I can trust this person. Definitely during the year, if I was on a job site or like if I had a quote later in the day, I wouldn't like go home to get changed. Like I would definitely show up in painter clothes, and I would do exactly what Phil said. I was like, oh yeah, like we were just working on a project like this last week, or like this morning we were doing this, because that can build trust as well. And it would be a little bit weird as like a small business owner if I wasn't involved in my business. And I like the point that you made about cohesion between every touch point, because that really like speaks to like every area of the business as well, right? Like if you have painters that are like super cluttered and disorganized, then that is gonna not hold up the expectation that you set when you show up, put together. Like every part of the business is a representation of you, and so it like matters at every single point.
Did you show up in painted clothes well?
Yeah. Throughout the whole winter, I would always market. I would always sell in painter clothes, and I think like humans buy a lot based on emotion, and a lot of emotion is driven by story. And so one thing that I had a lot of intention going into my year, and something that I would intentionally try to craft throughout each of the touch points, was the story of essentially why they should like me, why they should trust me, why they should trust our company. And so for me, it was kind of explaining that like, hey, I've always grown up working in the trades. Like I've always worked trades jobs growing up. I actually managed for another painting business, which is very helpful as well in my story. It's like, hey, I worked up the ladder. I started doing the trades, and then I became a manager, and now I'm a business owner. And it's not that I am just some guy who's like hiring other people to paint. It's like, hey, my business is now at a point where I don't have the time to paint anymore, so I focus more on just providing amazing value to our team and to our customers. And as well, just like my long-term goal, like personally for me, I want to be an entrepreneur, and I know that the way that happens is by providing value to the world, by having happy customers. And the way that I'm going to learn how to do that is by taking my small business, my small painting business, and providing an amazing customer service. And so when I'm hiring employees, I'm thinking about how they can contribute to that, and I'm telling that story, which is the reality, that's exactly what I think about my business, to my customer. So they read it, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, this is like totally not just some fucking guy off Kijiji who's giving me a price and I'm going to find the lowest quote. That's all of a sudden they're bought in, they see the story, they see me, they understand why they should trust me. And then it's also cohesive because we're continuing to tell that story from different frames at different touch points along the process.
I like that. Yeah.
Please subscribe. Will said if we don't hit 100 subscribers by the end of the month, something really, really bad is going to happen to me.
Yeah, if you need to sell to $1 million, I would probably sell some jobs that are a little bit less profitable.
Yeah, you're probably going to sell a couple jobs that you're not going to make any money.
Well,
if I'm selling to a revenue goal of $1 million,
Like you'll probably sell a couple jobs that you'll make like 100.
Bro, but the thing is too, like, I guess it depends. Like, if you're cutting your price down, but if you're cutting the hours down, then that's when the opportunity cost comes in, right?
Yeah, I think it's all about like what is your bottleneck, because ultimately like one thing that I experienced this year is production like wasn't my bottleneck. Like I had the recruiting systems, I had the painters, like whatever jobs I sold, I was confident I'd be able to produce. And so when we talk about, I think we were talking earlier about, if you sell a 5K job at $4,000, you're cutting your price by 20%, but you're cutting your profit by 50%.
Yeah, by like $1,000.
Right? Because you'd only be making about 2K on that 5K job.
Yeah.
So it totally would not be recommended if production was your bottleneck for two reasons. One, you're just making less money, but two, your painters are then stuck on that site, producing you a profit per hour that's half of what it would be if you were to just say no to that job and go book a different job at a higher profit rate.
Yeah, definitely.
However, for me, in the way my business was set up this year, is like I would take that job 10 out of 10 times because I'd rather make $1,000 than $0. And my limiter is going to be the number of leads I can get and the number of sales I can book, because I was pretty much my only salesperson, and then I had one other who I ended up hiring. So I think it just depends like what the bottleneck is. Like if I knew that I only had 7 painters who were going to be with me, then I probably wouldn't have taken a job like that, because I'd rather make more profit. But I think about profit as like a number, not as a percentage.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's definitely a certain point in business size where you can like very quickly, like, what your compromise you're going to make on any given job. And for myself, like I ran a slightly sub 200K job. I probably would want to keep my costs at exactly 35% of the job or 37% of the job, just because I'm paying a pretty high royalty and I don't have that much work to produce, right? Like I want to be as profitable as I possibly can be with the limited number of employees I have. So like I had a couple jobs this year that like I did do that. Like I had a $4,800 job that the client just like bargained me down to $4,300, and I made less money on that job than the second job that I sold to him. So, and the second job was like less than half. And like that first job, was a huge bottleneck for me, because at that time I only had 2 crews running, and I had one crew that was working a full week of work that made me like next to no money.
Right.
So, obviously if you have like 5, 6, 7 crews, then it's very easy to say, yeah, like I'll take half as much as I would have made just to have you making me money. And if you don't have that kind of a resource, obviously your priorities are a little bit different. But Phil, for you this year, like where did you find your like most significant bottleneck was?
Sales for sure. Yeah, we just didn't have enough sales. Our average job size was smaller. Didn't have enough upsells. I don't think we've talked about upsells yet. They can be incredibly profitable.
Yeah, upsells are
definitely
like the
a
best.
good point to touch
My
on.
most profitable jobs are all like
100%.
repeat customers or like massive upsells.
Yeah. Like I had a job that went from 2K to 11.5K, and it was by number my most profitable, and by percentage I produced it at a 40% profitability rate. So like it's just super profitable when you're upselling after the original contract.
Right. You're already on the job site. You already are in the flow of work. Your boys are there. You've already like got some of the material potentially that can spill over onto the upsell. And then Will, I know that you had like a great way to frame upsells. If you're having a client conversation about adding, a portion of the job, how would you go about that?
Yeah, so tactically, like the best way I found to do upsells, obviously below that, it's just like do good quality work, because then people are going to like the work and they're going to want upsells. But when you actually get into the conversation, the specific wording, what I would do is I would price it out as if it was an independent job, which would include admin fee, it would include marketing fee, it would include travel time, it would include all the new gallons of paint, it would include all the setup and cleanup of all the different individual things. So I would price it out like that, and they would see what the value they would be getting if they called me out of the blue, what I would charge them. And then I would say, and because we're already here, we already have the paint, we already are set up, like it's already the travel and admin's taken care of, this is how much I would charge you. And it would be like a significant decrease. So they would, instead of thinking like, oh, maybe I'll do this next year, like, at least I have the price now, they're like, oh shoot, like I could just save like 40% of the cost if I just add this on now. Like, of course I'm going to do that. Like, why wouldn't I? And they already know you, they already like you, they've already seen your work, so they know exactly what they're getting. And I found like when I had upsells like that, I'd never had any like touch-up problems. I never had any problems picking up the check or any like complaints or anything like that, because they already are a customer.
They kind of like doubled down.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, yes, we're happy, let's do more. And I also found that I was able to like give good, healthy budgets to my painters, because I wasn't worried about like winning the job based on price.
Right.
Like I wasn't going to be like, oh, like it's technically 155 square feet, but like I'll call it 150 because that'll, you know what I mean? Then because I think their budget's like 4K and I want to keep it under that. It's like, hey, like this is the most amount of time it could possibly take someone to do, so I'm gonna make this as the budget. And then, you know, if they work super fast, they get to beat the budget. The painters make more, I make more, and the customer's happy. They already know us, they already like us. They're saving money as well. So that's what I found. What about you? Did you get a lot of upsells this year?
Yeah, I probably did about 15K or so in upsells, and some of them were like multiple jobs. So, you know, just going through a project, like even in, you can do it like in at multiple points, right? You could do it in the walk around, just like adding things on that the client may not have noticed needed painting.
You can
like,
do it at the quote as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the quote, you can do it, you know,
At the original walk around.
at the original walk around of
You
the
can
job.
you can teach your boys to recognize upsells.
Yeah, it's
Or
like
girls.
super fun to teach an employee to do that, because
They would
then
always get so fired up, man.
like I had one painter, Oliver, who was like a total stud for me this year, and he called me after like upselling a porch for a client, and he was like so excited. It was probably like his favorite part of the summer, if I were to ask him, probably. And you know, it was only like $1,600, but like as like a student going into first year university, how often do you get the opportunity to learn how to do that and then execute on like a super cool part of a business?
Cool. So I think like that's a decent foundation of profitability. Like I think we're all in agreement that the most important thing is like pricing the job well.
Yep.
Price high.
And then really when it comes down to recruiting, it's just like put in the time it takes and have enough interviews, and then obviously have like an onboarding process where you're setting expectations with people so that they can work fast. I do think though there is something that we haven't talked about yet, and I know in your first year you actually didn't pay a piece rate, you paid hourly. What do you think was the impact of that on your profitability and like the speed of your painters?
I just to go back a bit, I paid hourly because I wasn't confident enough in my quoting that it would be fair to pay people piece rate, and I'm still a little bit like not sure what exactly is the best way in terms of like to get my painters the most enrolled as possible. But about halfway through this summer, I was like, okay guys, this is ridiculous. You guys are clearly not working as hard as you should be, and it's unfair for you almost to not be working as hard as you could be because you guys are working within my business. So I did switch people onto piece rate, and I did see an increase in efficiency, obviously there. If people are getting paid for how many hours they're producing, then they're going to be working more quickly. It's like a pretty easy way to incentivize painters to make sure that they're working as hard as they should be. And I know, Will, like you didn't necessarily like pay people less when they went over budget, but it was just like at least having that expectation set made it so that people were more likely to work more quickly, and we're incentivized to get wins.
Yeah, like there's two pieces, and the first one is easy. It's like you actually have to give enough hours in the budget for it to be something that is beatable. Because I think that potentially what happened for you and what I've seen happen for a lot of rookies is like they don't quote that way, and they kind of cut corners, and they forget to add ladder time, they forget to add second coat, they forget to add cleanup, and then the first few jobs like they try to pay piece rate, but people go way over, and then they just have to drop it entirely. They're like, okay, we're just going to pay you hourly because they just didn't quote jobs properly. So that's one piece of it. But then I think the second piece of it is exactly what you were saying, which is the point of the piece rate is not to save money. Like if someone does, if you quote a job for 100 hours and it takes someone 120 hours, like you're not paying them only 100 hours. You know, maybe in a nuanced case if they go an hour under budget, like it totally depends on the expectations you set within your business. But ultimately, like you're paying people like at least a certain amount. And if they win, if they go faster, then they make the extra money. But what it does is it just allows them to be more incentivized to work faster. So it's not that, you know, you quote for 80 and it takes them 100, and so, oh, now I only have to pay them 80, so I'm saving and making more money. Because you can do that for one job, and then the second job they're going to quit. Or you're paying them less than minimum wage, and it's illegal and totally unethical. But the point of it is not to save money, it's to have both people make more money, because they're going to paint faster, they're going to work through more jobs, and they're going to make more than their base hourly because they're just doing more work. So it's really just like an incentive system for them to work faster, not for you to save money.
Yeah, and if you can present it to that as to your painters as well, I think it'll be a lot easier to set those expectations, because like setting piece rate expectations might be difficult depending on how you do it. And I know that some people within your business were actually like super happy to be on piece rate. And I also have like the best painters in my business. Yeah, guess what? They love piece rate because they just make more money.
Yeah, it's a super good way to gauge the both intent and ability of a potential employee is in the interview process. Tell them about piece rate, and if they're like, oh shit, like I don't want to do that, they're probably not a person that's going to work all that hard.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're like, oh shit, I can make more money if I work harder, like you want those kinds of people in your business. So it's like a good way to gauge the value of potential employees as well.
Cool.
Totally.
So sell at a high price.
Yeah.
Recruit good people.
Yeah, and then what would you guys say is like a good piece rate to put people at, like kind of numbers wise?
I don't know. It's different. I paid fairly high. I paid like $20 an hour.
Yeah, I definitely had a system where if my guys did 80-hour payrolls 2 weeks in a row, 90-hour payrolls 2 weeks in a row, it was $1 an hour raise. If they did 100-hour payroll, $1 an hour raise, and that also incentivized people to work a lot harder. Of course, some people were like, "Oh, I don't want to do that," and those, weren't my best painters. In terms of like a good starting rate, I started all my painters at $17.50.
Yeah, me too.
Because I know how shit a minimum wage job is, and I know my perceptions of those bosses that I had when I was working minimum wage, and it was never good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started at 16, then I would bump them up 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
They all finished kind of closer to 20.
Yeah.
And they also all beat budget. Like on average, they hit 1.1, so $16 is actually like $17.50.
Yeah.
And then again, room for raises.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the one thing we didn't talk about, and I think it's kind of good we didn't talk about it, is material costs.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, I think people focus on material costs too much. Like really, it's just like, don't be wasteful. If you're wasting brushes or if you're ordering way too much paint, then obviously you're kind of screwing yourself. But as long as you're just like being normal with your materials, it's gonna roughly
it's
kick out to the
hard
same.
it's hard to spend too much on paint. Like, there's like, if you go to Sherwin-Williams, like they have a calculator to tell you how much paint to order.
Mm-hmm.
So there's resources to get how much paint you need to buy.
Yeah, I would always just order enough for day one of the job.
Yeah. Day one of the job.
And then I would
like
tell the crews, like, hey, based on how much you think you're going to need, you can order more gallons as you go.
Yeah, definitely a good system there. And then in terms of other materials, like paintbrushes and rollers, like I know a lot of contracting companies, like their biggest loss on materials is like employees losing materials.
Yeah, bro, I lost $500 worth of stuff this year easily.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was actually really good with that. I lost like one sander.
We got a crew kit stolen, so that fines.
Yeah, that's
I got a ladder
expensive.
stolen, so that's like $500
Yeah, you
down the
lost
drain.
like a 32-foot or a 40-foot?
Brand new 40-foot ladder.
It got stolen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to pick it up for him because you were.
I was away on my road trip.
Yeah, and I went to the job site and I got there and the people were like on the porch and I was like, hey, like, do I have the right address? Like, there's supposed to be a 40-foot here, and they're like, yeah, someone picked it up this morning.
Oh, that was
Tough.
Yeah, you have to hide your stuff, especially in Toronto, man.
And clients won't do that for you. After a while, they get super pissed off and they like put it on the lawn, and then it's like anyone's taking.
What's up, guys? We're super stoked to be announcing a sick giveaway for you guys. All you guys subscribe. I know we just started, but we want to give back. So all you got to do is hit the subscribe, and we're going to be giving away one free lead from last year. That said, never call me again. But hey, a lead's a lead. So let's get after it, boys. Hit the subscribe and you'll be entered to win.